So we will try in this class to understand what carbonate factories are. On this slide here, I'm showing you that carbonate factories can be understood or divided based on the type of precipitation that take place on them. So the best definition of a carbonate factory, I think, is the place or the location where carbonate production takes place. So if you look at a reef, you can see that we have a location here that is teeming with calcium carbonate producers, in this case corals. The fish are just here because they're pretty, but they're not important. But you can see that in the shallow water we have production of calcium carbonates, whereas when we go into the deeper water we still see corals, but less and less. And so that location where production of carbonate predominantly takes place, and we'll explore in the next class what controls the production of carbonate, well, that location is effectively the carbonate factory. Now, we can divide carbonate factory into multiple types of factory. So we will focus on marine carbonates in this class. Lacustrine carbonates exist, but in terms of volume, except for some weird exception in the South Atlantic, they're not extremely frequent or common. So marine carbonates can precipitate from an abiotic source. This is a cement, but the largest volume of carbonate sediments will come from biotic precipitation. That means from things that are controlled by biology. In this, we can distinguish two types of precipitation. One is known as biotically induced precipitation. The other one is known as biotically controlled precipitation. We'll look at both cases. So let's focus on biotic precipitation, and more specifically, biotically induced precipitation. So what is biotically induced precipitation? Well, biotically induced precipitation is the oldest form of biologically mediated precipitation. It's been around since at least 3.5 billion years, and you've seen it if you've seen stromatolites. Stromatolites are effectively algal carbonates. So why is this biotically induced precipitation? Well, it has to do with photosynthesis. Blue-green algae take 6 CO2, carbon dioxide, and 6 molecules of water, and with sunlight, a source of energy, generates sugar, which is a chemical energy that can be stored, and a byproduct is oxygen. And of course, this is photosynthesis. So let's look at how things happen in an algal mat. So here I'm showing you the first layer of an algal mat. An algal mat is effectively these algal filaments that are also paired with some kind of a colloidal gel. It's a carbonate gel. It's not completely crystallized carbonate, but it's a colloidal solution that will eventually solidify and give you a hardened rock. So what happened next is this colloidal gel can trap sediments. Those are the yellow particles shown on this slide. And these trapped sediments and the colloidal gel eventually will solidify. And when they solidify, of course, this is bad news for the algae, because the algae that is below the hard layer will die, but the algae that is above is able to grow and give rise to a new layer of algae. This is why those stromatolites are layered. It's because they grow on top of each other. Each generation of layer of algae is growing on top of the previous generation. Now this is a tremendous advantage for the algae because it means it can keep up with sea level and stay close to the zone of maximum penetration of sunlight, which you need if you're photosynthetic. So here we're talking about an organism that precipitate calcium carbonate for a function. If you look at these shells here on a beach, they're clearly precipitated for a function, which is protection in this case, to protect the animal from predation. That is a very complicated process. If you look at the crystalline structure of these calcite or aragonite, they're extremely complex, and you can see that multiple layers of the shells have different crystal orientation, and all of this is extremely controlled by the organism. So this is controlled precipitation. Now, when we talk about controlled precipitation, we can talk about two types of organisms that use controlled precipitation. One is heterotrophs. Heterotrophs essentially need a food supply to live. So they're a bit like us, or like this great white shark catching a snack on his way out of the ocean. They need to feed. Now there's another type of organisms that also precipitate calcium carbonate, and those are autotrophs. So I find this footage spectacular. It's a sunken ship, it's the top of a sunken ship, and you can see on the top mast, the radar mast effectively, that's a World War II vessel, you can see that this mast is colonized by corals. Corals, just like the blue-green algae we talked about before, use light to grow, and so they take advantage of being at the top surface of this vessel to grow. If you were to dive deeper onto this vessel, there would be no corals because it would be too deep and the corals could not survive there. So that's an important concept here. So now if we go back to the concept of carbonate factory, we see that we can have three types of factories. One is known as the M factory. M stands for mud mounds or micrite. Remember, micrite is a carbonate mud, a very fine carbonate mud. The M factory is controlled or dominated by biotically induced precipitation. If we look at the biotically controlled factories, we distinguish two types of factories. One is dominated by heterotrophic organisms, like the shells we've seen on that beach. This is known as the C factory, C for cool water carbonates, but also for controlled precipitation. We will see that this factory is actually, in terms of volume, not very abundant, and it tends indeed to grow into colder waters. And then we have a factory that is dominated in volumes of sediments by autotroph organisms, things like corals that basically produce a lot of calcium carbonates but need light to grow. And this is known as the T factory, T for tropical because it tends to grow into the warmer waters, but also T for topmost water precisely because it grows in shallow water where light penetration is abundant and important.